We are on the lunch break and the end of the questioning of Atif Choudhury, who was an activist in the international solidarity movement, but I've been largely not really by that point, who was spied on by the undercover police officer HN18, Robert Hastings, who using the cover name Rob Harrison infiltrated No Borders, State of Emergency, the Ramparts Social Centre, as well as the International Solidarity Movement. I'm joined by Evelyn Lubbers from the Undercover Research Group. A lot of what Atif said over the last section of the hearing was subject to restriction order, which meant it wasn't much he said actually subject to restriction order, but because of the restriction orders, huge amounts of it were not broadcast. So there's a bunch of things we can't say, but there's a lot of stuff that you won't have heard that we can.
The most of it was like to protect the identity and the privacy of Maya. Fair enough.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
The idiot system. The YouTube.
We don't tend to give the reasons for the restriction orders. That in itself is a breach. It's about privacy.
It's about privacy, but like for people who are listening or watching at home, it's really irritating because
it is because the
YouTube feed is being cut off as soon as there is a breach and won't come back on until 10 minutes later. Although, like in the hearings, we don't even stop anymore for these kind of restrictions.
Also, hopefully, the inquiry will not take offence at the fact that we've said that it was about the privacy of Maya. Technically, that is a breach, but hopefully that'll be fine.
Sorry, well, it's my fault.
Anyway, so the evidence of Atif Choudhury, he was questioned about the activities that he was involved with, which, as he said, he was no longer really involved with the international solidarity movement during the time period that Robert Hastings was infiltrating the group. What Robert Hastings used to do was go to the international solidarity movement meetings and then go to Atif's house afterwards.
He would visit like twice a week or more.
3 times a week at least.
3 times, and just unannounced would always turn up. Atif considered him a friend, a good friend. And he was also asked about his feelings of betrayal. And he still has like real difficulties. Join us.
We are also joined by Asa Winstanley, who was just been in a meeting with his lawyers, hence we started without him. But we're just talking really about. I'll just say that Asif spoke very movingly about the impact of the friendship that he thought he had with the man he knew as Rob Harrison. About the fact that there's such a huge impact on his life. The fact that Rob Harrison was the person who introduced him to his wife, and when he spoke very movingly at the end about how when he told his children finally about the reality of the infiltration
today and yesterday, and it was like.
But I mean, the point I was trying to make was that he finally did tell his children. His children said, "Yeah, but we were born." And that he said his child asked him, "Does this make you sad?" He said, "Does all of it make you sad?" And he's like, "Yeah, it does." And he said, "But we were born." And
Rob has actually then had an impact on Atif's children as well, because imagine he's been told by his dad, "Yeah, it all makes me sad," and the son is thinking, "Well, do I make you sad?" I don't know. I'm not in his head, but I can imagine that. That's what it is, and this is the layers and the reverberations that all these infiltrations have over decades, and it's incredibly deep and layered and complex. And like Atif said, it'll never be okay. It'll never go away. And he was very humble, and he sort of said, forget the exact words, but it was he didn't say it was nothing, but he said it was. Compared to the women, especially after hearing Maya yesterday, he just contextualized it in all that way. But there's no doubt of how damaging it is.
I mean, one thing that he said was that he felt a guilt for being so affected by it, given how strong the women have been. Which is I don't think we should think of things in those ways. But it was incredibly humbling, and I would really recommend. I'm not sure how much of that last section was broadcast because of all the restrictions, but I would recommend listening to that if you're able to.
Yeah, and I do think it sort of emphasizes like you said, like the extent of the harm done by the undercover officers, because obviously there's very much of the focus is on the women and on the intimacy and the breaches in trust and the deep feelings of betrayal include the friends the undercover made, the good friends they made. Like Atif described Rob as someone like more or less family, like anyone who knows the way to the fridge without being, like is family for me. And that is the way, that was what the friendship was about. And they talked about all kind of things. And he even explained how when Rob told him about Maya's pregnancy scare, that he actually cried in front of him, and that is something that almost never happened. Although we must add that he also said that he wasn't sure why she wasn't telling him whether she was pregnant or not, and was using it to, as power over him, which was like a very disgusting.
He's definitely got a victim complex. Isn't he?
Yeah. Well, I
think that came across very strongly yesterday during the evidence that Maya gave of the kind of cry bully kind of approach that he took.
I was at the end of my line, basically. And now I think Atif did a really, really good job by not just answering the question that he was asked, but giving very much context and explaining what he did, and like explaining that he only wanted to support people and give them a community here and over in Palestine. And his main business in the end was like olive oil and supporting farmers over there.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, and he brought us like the loveliest food as well, and so he gave all that context to make it even more clear how idiot it was that Rob would describe him as the leading light of the movement, or like. Even from his personality and the way he presented, it was quite clear that he wasn't such a thing. But by giving all this context, it became more clear. I think it was very good.
It was interesting. He talked about the way in which he felt that the reports that the undercover police officer Robert Hastings filed on him may have found their ways into front of the eyes of Shin Bet and the Israeli authorities. He talked about times when he had visited Palestine, having to go through the Israeli border system, and the degrading and like horrible treatment, being strip searched on a runway. He talked about one of the times when he was being interviewed in a Shin Bet room, or interrogated, and they said, "Do you know why you're here?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm here to pick up olives." And they were like, "No, do you know why you're in this room?" And he was like, "No, how would I know that?" And they they seemed to find funny, suggesting they had like a more of a knowledge of him than would have really made sense.
Yeah, so that is sort of explained now, or we can't prove it, of course, but it does seem that information was shared with the Israeli authorities.
I mean, and it would fit really, like regular watchers will know, the way in which we saw reports being shared with BOSS, the South African security services, around the anti-apartheid movement. We heard from the evidence from Lord Hayne, no less, around that during Tranche 1.
Even Special Branch had a special contact person in the South African embassy, and no doubt that you'll know more about that than I, but there are similar contacts now with like Israeli embassy and Israel lobby we'll see more about that this afternoon.
We heard from Trevor Morris about the Israel desk during his evidence. Essentially, the communication that existed between the security services in different countries is it's a key part of how these operations operate.
Yeah, and while this is outside the remit of the inquiry, which is very weird, because many of the undercovers went to large protests outside in other countries. Mark Jenner even went on holiday with Alison to Israel. it can't be true that undercover officers were active abroad without permission of authorities over there. And we know in the case of Mark Kennedy, which we will see in the future, that the German authorities, for instance, asked for him to come to the G8 wherever in Berlin, or so there was always communication between authorities. So no doubt.
I think that'll also be relevant again when it comes to when undercover officers didn't travel. So, for example, when the G8 was in Russia, Marco Jacobs was due to travel out to there, and he withdrew at the last minute, which there's a lot of unanswered questions about people who ended up going instead of him. But I mean, that's for another day. I'm going back to the actual questions that Atif was asked this morning, and we saw a lot of the intelligence reports. Again, we're seeing this huge amounts of personal details, details about his relationship with his wife, details about personal private events, the activities of his housemates and friends. Yeah, I mean, this is a really common thing, but there's just so much detail around people's lives that are being reported on that really have nothing to do with their activism.
Yeah, just incredibly intrusive. And Hastings was trying to build up this. I think in one of the reports it said about, it's I forget the way he put it, but they're trying to build it. He's trying to build up a granular picture, basically just justifying the most ridiculous intrusion, just of things like the things that really seemed to stay with Atif were that he'd written down his father's number plate of his car. Like, what possible reason is there for him to do that? And the thing that was really new to me today that I hadn't seen was that document which was listing Atif and his known associates, and two of them were the Mike's Place bombers, 2003, bombing operation against an Israeli restaurant, I believe. And Rob Harrison has listed them as known associates of Atif from ISM. There's absolutely zero connection between Atif and those two, and it was racial profiling. Absolutely.
I mean, that document is like a ridiculous. I mean, it's a list. It's quite a long list of names. Atif is directly underneath the two suicide bombers.
Exactly.
Obviously, as you pointed out, they've grouped together the Muslim-sounding names.
Yeah.
But if you go down that list, that includes some environmental activists who, I mean, in some cases, I don't know if they were ever really involved in Palestine solidarity work or anything. I mean, there's like literally no connection.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this just really goes to the heart of the way in which so many of these reports just like grabbed at names, stuck them together, trying to cast aspersions on people, using such limited connection. I mean, we heard it today. There was questioning about the fact. I mean, essentially, those two suicide bombers attended a memorial event for Rachel Corrie, who was an ISM activist. An event that was attended by all sorts of people.
It was public,
a very public event. To somehow like tie them to the ISM is some serious mental gymnastics.
Yeah, he was trying to justify his deployment. It was very clear. Yeah,
and I think that came across quite strongly. I think Atif did a really good job of like pointing out the racial profiling, the way in which some people are more citizens than others. The fact that you do not have. You don't have the same sort of right under the law as somebody who with a Muslim sounding name with brown skin. Yeah. He talked quite powerfully, I think, when he was talking about why he wasn't a volunteer with the ISM in Palestine.
Yeah,
which I found incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I met Atif out in Palestine a couple of times, I believe, once or twice, but this was years after his involvement in ISM London. I never met him in ISM London, but he was kind of like, I know Atif would hate me saying this, but he was like the legend, the man, the myth, the legend, Atif, because my friends would talk about him and how great he was and how he played this role at the beginning of ISM. And so to me, that's why Rob, or at least it's a big part of why Rob targeted him. And these kinds of deployments are incredibly damaging. I think my overall impression is this afternoon was a bit. Well, it was more heavy. It wasn't as heavy as yesterday, but it was definitely heavier than this morning, where you could really see the mental health toll So this is the toll this is taken on Atif's mental health, and and I he talked about how he felt it even hard at certain points recently within the last year to engage with the inquiry, the process, and I remember those times. That was a really dark time for Atif. Really, really horrible stuff. So it was great to see him today. So just absolutely smashing it, basically.
No, he was a very good witness, very articulate, very erudite. Covered all the bases, I would say. At the end, John Mitting asked a question, which normally means he's got something really pressing, but this time it was just to say, "Are you having any trouble with Zaytoun still?" And he was like, it seemed like he was inquiring if there was any olive oil for sale, which felt like like a different approach from the chair. We are due to go back in. This afternoon session will start fairly soon. It is Chris Nyam, he of Stop the War Coalition, who people may have been following his court case around the criminalization of Palestine protests that's been happening recently. He was a member of Globalized Resistance back in the 2000s when it was targeted by the undercover police officer HM118, who used the cover name Simon Wellings, to infiltrate not just Globalized Resistance, but also to put himself in a position to report on the Dissent Network and the anarchist autonomous scene at the time. He was out of order. He was due to give evidence last Tuesday, but he'll be starting now instead. Please follow if you can. We'll do a recap of what he has to say during the break and at the end of the day. Anything else you'd like to add about this morning?
No, that's it. I think it was. I think next week when Rob's actually on the stand, as it were. I know it's not supposed to be adversarial, but I hope it is.
Yeah, quite.
I think he's going to be in a difficult position. There's just going to be a lot of I can't remember and denial, I think, which is kind of what always happens, right?
Mostly. In some cases, the other approach that sometimes they take is to be very long-winded and very boring and speak at length without saying anything. I would be quite surprised if, given the material we've heard so far, he is able to deploy that in the way in which Bob Lambert did, certainly Simon Wellings did. And some of the others, I think he is in an incredibly difficult situation. I think there are multiple different angles by which he can absolutely.
He's also a massive narcissist. That's definitely what I've learned this week. I kind of knew it, but that's been brought home to me this week, just the sheer sort of psychopathic narcissism.
Yes.
So I think we'll see flashes of that next week.
Yes, and we certainly saw that with Jim Boyling, who really lost his temper whilst being questioned, both with the counsel to the inquiry, with the public gallery, even at times with the chair. I hope he does the same thing, because it comes across very badly. All right, thanks for joining us. Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Thanks for joining us. Please join us later on when we react to what Chris Nyam has to say. Bye for now.